So this is my first tech conference, and I was pondering. I was like, well, how do I grade the talk? How do I speak about things? I was nervous. And then by lunch yesterday, I was like staring through my pizza, wondering what part of my mind I want Facebook to be reading, and like whether or not I'm going to have a virtual avatar flipping my lights on and off in the next 2 years. And I was like, there's way more things to be nervous than giving this talk, and I thought that was great, because then I could relax a little bit. So I'm going to talk about music in VR and in 360 environments. I'm going to talk about rendered environments and what that changes, because they're different from regular media. And they let us do some really, really cool things with sound and with music. So a lot of these audio environments give us tools that let us shape music and bend music, that lets us structure narratives and interact with the visuals, and allows us to interact with music in the same way we are used to interacting with visuals, where they're kind of dynamic and they're morphing and they're changing. All those things that we associate with VR that aren't possible in the real world, a lot of that is now possible with music, and that's really, really exciting. From a musical point of view, as a composer, it's like another set of dimensions to compose across, which makes things really, really fun. So, there's obviously some differences between film and VR and television series and all these traditional mediums. Normally you would organize a structure, so you'd storyboard out a story, or you'd order shots and edit things, and at the end you would add music to all of that. And you would carefully communicate with the director about what the emotional impact of that music should be at a particular moment. Now, of course, in VR, the user is the director. The visual environment is fundamentally unpredictable. They're going to look where they're going to look, they're going to move how they're going to move, and you somehow have to take a musical score and make it sound appropriate under all of those different circumstances. So the best analog for this type of thinking is obviously gaming. So game composers over the last few decades have sorted out a number of different ways to deal with this. There's adaptive music, so you can organize tracks vertically, you can organize sequences and arrangements across time. These are triggered by either game events, small interactions tend to get lost, so there'll be a trigger. You'll have something happen in the context of the game, you'll go to a new room, you'll defeat a boss, all those things that we're familiar with, and that will trigger a new musical score. And the most sophisticated of these make it really, really subtle and impressively unnoticeable and still relevant, and that's great. But VR, of course, offers this weird connection with our bodies, where it's not a controller, it's not a television at the front of the room, it's not even a giant screen, you're in it, it's around you, it's wrapped around you, and the music has to do the same thing. So this picture, the music for this picture is going to sound very differently if you've just fallen into the hole and now you're at the bottom of a pit, or if you've been in the hole for an hour of the experience and now you're about to leave. The music is going to be the puppet master there. It's going to tell you what you should be feeling. Is that place somewhere you want to go, or is that the source of your troubles? And if it was a film, you would just compose, you would see the shot and time it out and compose appropriately. But in VR, that's not going to happen. They're going to be looking down into a pit, or they're going to be looking up at the hole. And what you would want is the music to match their choices. So if I look up at that hole, I want to hear nice, bright, happy tones. If I want to get out, of course. If I just fell through it, I might not want to hear that. But if you look down into the pit, you're going to want to hear an ominous, kind of dark, frightening score, and that's what a film composer would do, and that's what we want to accomplish in the flexible, dynamic world of VR. So, in a conventional workflow, you would record a bunch of instruments. You would spend some time with studio musicians, you would record a violinist, you'd record, a drum set and a sax and the piano and whatever else. You'd mix them together and then you would implement them in the experience. And often people make the mistake of doing that at the very end of the experience, and I think that's what the next speaker is going to talk about as well, and some other problems that can come up. I'll leave that to him. But this is the conventional workflow. You create a piece of music and you say, here's your soundtrack. You put it in an experience. I wanted to see what would happen if I introduced the VR headset at the beginning of the workflow, as kind of treat it like a mixing knob. If I take the data that's coming out of a VR headset spatial formats and audio formats in various ways use that data to generate an environment. They make a shell of sound around you, and that data exists in different formats used in different ways, and I wanted to use that to control key elements of the score. So introduce the headset early, you're looking around, and it's mixing the piece in real time. So it's going to create the emotional context you want in either direction. So the role of the composer in VR is a little bit different. What you're doing is setting an initial environment, you're setting out the rules for how the music is going to interact, but then you're allowing the user to determine how the score is actually put together. So different musical elements. And now for some of you that are musically competent, there's obviously notation on the screen. If you can read that, great. If not, it's fine. You just have to know that very small adjustments to music can have drastic emotional impacts. You take one note out, and now the score is very different than it used to be. It's things like thirds and sevenths and all those key harmonies and rhythms that change the emotional character of what you're doing. So throughout the composition process and throughout your thinking about music, you're not separating the music by instrument. You're going to cut it into little bits. So you might have a piano that you've now broken into 3 different tracks. And that's going to give you the power to manipulate all of those notes independently using the headset. So you can put them back together, you can separate them, you can move them around using certain formats depending on the medium you're working in. You can make all these changes as the user is experiencing your experience, and they can have the correct emotional associations. So the key to a good VR score would be supporting multiple emotional perspectives at one time. So you want to be standing there, and if you look one way, music sounds happy. You look the other way, music sounds sad. You look up, it sounds mysterious. You look down, it sounds frightening, depending on whatever the visual context is. And you can guide the user's attention through all of this using the musical score. So I don't want to get into the music too much here. If we can talk later if you want to hear about it. But the key elements of this is that you implement key musical points in your experience, and then you have others that you can toggle between. So you kind of create a fundamental field of music that the user can move through, and then add and remove key elements as they interact with the environment. We're going to talk about how that happens in a number of different ways. But we're in a virtual world, so there's no practical limits to that, right? You can break a violin track into 10 different pieces and spread it out, and then manipulate them all independently. You can take a piano and have the top half of the piano in one spot and the bottom half in a different spot, and gain control over them all. It's a huge amount of fun. If you guys are musicians, it's like, it's fun. So, here's a key example that I found recently, actually. This is a 2017 experience where they had 2 180-degree fields where there was simultaneous storytelling happening. The point was to tell the same story from 2 very different perspectives, and the crux of the work was that you would have a very different emotional response depending on which direction you were looking. And the audio designers used the same audio tools that I'm using for music to turn off certain dialogue when they looked one way, and then turn up dialogue when they looked the other way. So it's that same structure. So now the music should also behave in that way. You look one way, you hear one thing, look the other way, you hear the other thing, but you shouldn't notice it's happening. And it should sound through composed, we say. It should sound like one piece of music, but if you are a user and you make one set of movements, no one else is going to hear the same music. It's a unique score, it's unique to you. It's, nobody will ever hear that particular piece again, and nobody had heard it before. You just set the rules of the composer and then let the user unwind them as they work through the experience. So these are some of the formats that are useful in this way. They have different strengths and different weaknesses. Some of them do things really well, some of them do other things not so well. The most powerful of all are the game engines and the audio engines, where you pretty much have as much freedom as you can want. Your limits at that point are your creativity. So that's where I'm going to focus. I'm going to give you a little bit of an example of some ambisonic recordings. So these are best for 360 film. First, I'm going to show the first one we did. It was just some people skydiving. I pulled it from the public domain and attached some instruments to the different skydivers, just to see if I could make one seem like the villain and one seem like the hero. Just use the music, and depending on where you're looking, you're going to you're going to have those emotional associations. So go ahead, you can hit the first one. So this is mixed in stereo, of course, so you'll have to go and put on a headset if you want to hear the spatialization. But the point is that different instruments are at different points in this 360 space. So one section of strings is in one spot, the drums are kind of below you in the ground, the low strings are off of one character. Depending on where you're looking, you're going to make these associations. This one, that's okay. So this one, I wanted piano melodies falling from the waterfall. I wanted to put piano notes inside the water, so it sounds very kind of happy and uplifting that direction. And I wanted the big bass notes to come from the rocks behind you. You know, it's really neat to hear this and to look one way and kind of hear these gentle, major, uplifting notes falling down from one point and then hear the rocks rumble. So in this one, I wanted to imply emotion with the score. So for this, we had melodies that were kind of whizzing past the user. So a lot of these high frequencies would be kind of flying by your ears. So you're using the music to add to this visual environment. You know, the score is, it's as if you're kind of flying through Star Wars style and having all these instruments pass you very, very quickly. So that's ambisonics. There's some limits to that. The most rich and the most involved version of this is a 3D spatial composition. So this is where you make a hierarchy of notes and you spread them out in a rendered environment. So this is something you have to do in a game engine. So either Unreal or Unity, and you can get really sophisticated with Wise or Fmod. You can really gain control of everything and link it to pretty much any variable you can think of in a given experience. So these are different instruments that are attenuated and overlapping each other. So in the virtual space, you're going to have some instruments that overlap, some instruments that don't, and as long as you compose competently in that space, you can get very subtle interactions between things. Like every individual point in the experience will have a different score. There's a different mix at any point. So this allows you to do some really good things when you link certain elements to focus activation. So you can turn some notes up, some notes down, so you can have one direction with the emotion, one direction with a different emotion. And I'm going to play a short video of that right now. You can turn this one up. So this is not through compose, it's generated by the user. When they're looking in this direction, they're going to hear one harmonic environment, and as they turn their head, things will get gradually more dark. And turn back, it's going to sound major again. Or happy, I should say. So there's kind of a disconcerting element to presenting this, because if you do it right, it just sounds like regular music. But it's all being generated in real time by the user's position and the way they're looking. So this is how you might notate it. This was the very first one we did. So this is the environment in Unreal. Like it bums me out that there's actual Unreal developers here, because I kind of hacked this environment together. So, you know, give me a break. I'm a musician. But this is the notation that we use. So I kind of mapped out an emotional environment. That's the one you see on the right. So I had different emotions associated with each zone. And then I activated those red tracks with different focus activation conditions. So you look at them, they turn on, some of them turn off. The two at the top were inside objects. So I put musical elements, some instruments, or particular subdivisions of instruments inside objects. And then as you carry them around, they're going to interact with different environments to create new scores, so to create new emotional environments. So here's a rough description. I'm not going to run through this, I'm just going to kind of play a video for you. But this is carrying one object to different environments, and as you move with, like, there's a violin or a piano inside the grippable object within the engine. So this could be anything in the game context. It could be a valuable, some trinket or some gem, or all the things that we associate with gaming. But if you move it, it's going to sound happy. If you move it to this space, it's going to sound dark or scary. And it's going to communicate emotional information to the user as they go. So, go ahead. You're kind of putting together a score on the fly. As long as you have these objects full of instruments, the way you put them together will determine what the score is at that point. Now, as you move closer and closer towards the trees, they'll sound more and more and more happy. And now you're in an environment where that same object has switched a dark, minor sounding score into a major sounding score. And there's no limit to that technically. You can just keep making overlapping and overlapping and overlapping environments out to whatever limit you like. You can also make it only part of the score. You could make most of the score headlocked and conventional and just have a couple of key elements that are floating around. So when I was doing Scary Girl, have you guys done that? Scary Girl? The whole time, it's great. Like, I was giggling like a kid the whole time doing it, but I was like, I wish I could put like low, like ugly bass notes in that goo and have it sound wrong, you know? Like, if you look over there, it's gonna sound dissonant and frustrating to hear, you know? And you suck up the goo and all the pretty notes are left, you know? Now you're happy again. Same thing, I wanted to put kind of buzzy notes in those bats so they fly by and like you hear there's something that deserves your attention up there and it needs to be fixed, you know? And there's a really sophisticated body of musical knowledge that goes back centuries behind all that. We know how to do that as composers. We know how to make you feel confused and happy and sad. You know, that's what composers have been doing for forever. So here is a slightly more sophisticated narrative function example. So in this room, I don't have an example of this one, but we kind of drew out a story that we wanted to guide the user through. We wanted a person to enter a room, pick up an object, and then there was 2 doors. So we wanted to guide the person through one door and not the other just using music. So we just composed music such that if they picked up the object, they moved towards door A, the music sounded great, it sounded like, you know, happy, all the right notes happened, and things were lovely, and then if they moved towards the other door, things started to get dark and frightening and scary. It's like you're making a mistake, you know, back up, and then you back up, things sound better, and then you go in the right direction and things sound happy again. So you can use this to pull the user's attention around in a circle, you know. It's the same thing that sound designers do anyway, you know. They have a car drive by and you're meant to look at it, and that's how we deal with that sophisticated sphere, you know. Like, how do you get the user to look where you want? It's like, we use sound design to do it already, why not use musical harmony to do it? Why not use rhythm to do it, you know? If you guys understand music, you can use polyrhythms to switch from one tempo to another, gradually, you know? You make the triplets be the eighths, and the eighths be the triplets, and you keep going and going and going and going and going until you're in a new environment. You're at a new tempo and you're in a new harmonic spot. It's fantastic. So, of course, you know, the applications for this are pretty much anywhere where you would want emotional associations associated with the user's position and then a vector away from that position, which is pretty much every room scale environment. You would want to be able to associate a spot in the room with an emotion, and then you would want to associate a direction away from that spot with an emotion. And you can do it. You just have to compose. You have to go right back to the beginning when you're sitting there with a musician in front of you recording an instrument. And if you do that, then you can gain control over all those little bits. And it lets you, you know, we can use it to all these things. You can guide people around the narrative, you can draw their attention, you can educate people. So education is a cool one. You can, you know, you have a student that's meant to perform some educational task, and they start to do it wrong. You know, they pick up, you know, the wrong object. The music can start to tell them things are getting uncomfortable. Things are not the way they should be, you know? And if you do the opposite, you can pick up an object and things will sound correct. It's like, okay, you're on the right path, you're doing the right thing, keep doing what you're doing. And you know, it works. And obviously, like the creative arts, it's just really fun to do this. You want to do a theater production or a mixed media production, an AR production, where you have people interacting with each other. You want to have everybody carrying an object, and then only when certain groups get together, it makes a piece of music. The wrong group of people get together, it makes, you know, a dissonant, uncomfortable piece of music. All that can be done too. So that's it. Thank you very much.
So So are you relying entirely on spatialization, or are you actually modifying the presence or absence of instruments as the user turns their head?
It depends. You can do any blend that you want. You can have something that's spatialized and something that's head-locked. So you can keep some things head-locked, and then only key elements can be spatialized, or you can have the whole thing spatialized.
The reason I ask is because users in VR tend to move their heads around relatively quickly.
Yeah. So Unreal has settings for that, so you can make it there's a subtle delay. There's a delay you can set in Unreal Engine for sure, and certainly in Wise and Fmod, so that very quick interactions, don't do it. So you have to really look, and you can kind of tweak that depending on the experience.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I don't think we actually have any time. That's a lot of our questions, so thank you very much. Just going to see you later.